Hi everyone, this is Unraveling System and this is the last topic for our video series. Oil as specific commodity both impacting on and impacted by climate change.
Okay, let's start with some basic facts about oil. Crude oil is a natural resource found beneath the Earth's surface. Crude oil is recovered through drilling and is a major input for a large number of consumer products, such as plastics, gasoline, kerosene, pharmaceutical products, and even in fertilizers. The estimated world consumption of crude oil is around 95 million barrels per day.
Oil can become a source of degradation for our biosphere when it is released in spillages during the drilling phase or the transportation, or if it's combusted, it can release a number of pollutants in the atmosphere, such as CO2, the main man-caused greenhouse gas, or sulfur dioxide.
Okay, let's talk about oil as a commodity, where we analyze the supply, demand, and price. Starting off with supply. In talking about the supply, we refer to the oil reserves. These are the amounts of recoverable oil in both a technical and economical sense. In 2013, it was estimated that Venezuela held around 20% of these oil reserves. After that came Saudi Arabia with 18%, then Canada with 13%, and Iran with 9%. In this chart, you can see the global oil supply curve over the last 20 years. As you can see, there's a general increasing trend.
But Shani, what is currently influencing the global supply of oil?
Well, I can think of four distinct features. First of all, we have new shale production in the last decade. Then you have countries within the OPEC who are continuing their extraction in order to maintain their market share. Then you have Iran, of which the sanctions have been lifted, allowing it to export its oil reserves. And last but not least, we have an oil industry that's heavily subsidized.
Okay, one last question though.
All right.
How is our current environmental crisis potentially impacting the supply side?
Well, in order to answer that question, we can look at the green paradox, a theory by Sin. And it basically says that you have the oil extractors, these actors that know that the environmental crisis is going to have some influence and that their extraction activities will be heavily taxed in the future. So what do they decide? In order to avoid the costs of these taxes, they decide to just extract most of their oil right now. So theoretically, this means that the environmental crisis will lead to a short-term increase of the global oil supply.
Let's look at the demand now. So first of all, when an economy in our system is growing, so it's expanding, then also the demand for oil is expanding. This is what has been happening so far, although recently the demand globally is mainly sustained by developing countries such as China and India and by the US. What you can observe in the graph appearing next to me is this global demand curve, and what you can see is this general trend, increasing trend, and other two things. One is this depression towards the end of the curve, which is attributable to the recent financial crisis, 2008-2009. And what you can see also is that currently the rate of increase of this curve is slowing down. Therefore, the curve is flatter.
Okay, so the curve is currently getting flatter. What are the factors influencing that trend?
The causes are three, according to the International Energy Agency. So the first one is an overall uncertainty linked to the economic environment, meaning that we don't really know whether globally we have overcome the economic crisis started in 2008-2009. Then the second reason is milder temperatures. People are using less heating during the winter because climate change is raising temperatures, and therefore they use less fossil fuels. And the third one is that in some non-OECD countries have cut the oil-related subsidies, namely Angola, Nigeria, and Saudi Arabia. This has brought to an increase of the products that are derived from oil, and therefore this has helped to contain the demand within those countries.
Okay, so you asked me how the environmental crisis influences supply. So how does it influence demand?
Okay, we can see to a certain extent that this influence is happening also on the demand side. And we see that local communities that decide to organize and take some measures in order to raise their resilience towards climate change on one hand and their dependency on fossil fuels and oil in particular on the other.
Okay.
And I would say that the most luminous example is this transition towns movement.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's not the subject of this video, so check it out on other sources.
So up until this point, we've spoken about the supply and demand for oil. So let's talk about the price now. The price of oil is defined for 1 barrel of crude oil. So as with any other commodity, what influences the price is the demand. And as Chiara already mentioned, one of the factors influencing demand is the state of the economy. So a growing economy increases the demand and increases the price of oil. What's specifically interesting for oil is that tensions in the Middle East also tend to increase the demand for oil because people are less certain about the reserves available there, in the end leading to a higher price for oil. But Chiara, haven't you heard or read anything about the specific behavior of oil prices?
Yes, several economists have observed a so-called cyclical behavior of the oil price. As you can see in the graph appearing next to me, economists point at the so-called super cycles of the oil price. Each super cycle lasts more or less 27 years, and the pattern of the price is similar within each cycle. At the beginning of the cycle, we see the price of oil that goes up until it reaches an upward spike. After this upward spike, always in the first half of the cycle, we have two other minor price spikes after 7-8 years more or less from the first one, after which we have the fall of the price of the oil until this price crashes, signing the end of the first cycle. After that, there is going to be another similar cycle with the prices of oil recovering.
Okay, that's very interesting, this cyclical behavior of oil. But I've heard many experts argue that we won't enter a new super cycle.
Why then?
Well, I think it has to do with the fact that supply of oil is increasing. Like we've mentioned in the supply part of oil, there were 4 main reasons why the supply is expected to increase over the next years. So in summary, it was because the sanctions were lifted off of Iran, because the countries in the OPEC want to maintain their market share, because there's been shale production in the last 10 years, and because the oil industry is still being subsidized. So in the end, if the supply remains the way it is right now, the price of oil will also remain just as low. Alright guys, so to wrap it up, in conclusion, we have observed that the supply of oil is increasing, the demand of oil is increasing, though at a slower rate, and a major drop in the price of oil has been observed in the last years. This is a very unusual pattern if you compare it to conventional market theory, where an increase in the demand should lead to an increase in the price. So in our following video with our expert Robert Rapier, we'll go a bit more deeper into this unusual pattern.
And he will also talk about some policy instruments that should be put in place to help this green transition under the present circumstances that we have described.
So guys, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for our next video, the last one. And well, bye!
Bye!